there, my name is Dr. Kimberly Ernest. I'm a licensed psychologist, licensed professional counselor, and Executive Vice President of Pennsylvania Counseling Services. And today we are here with the How to Be Happy Hour to talk about motherhood.
Hi, I'm Valerie Weber. My husband and I co-own Chrisland Engineering and Matthew and Hockley Associates, and I'm a mother of two boys, Christian and Landon, who are high school age now.
Hi, my name is Kelsey Williams. I'm a licensed professional counselor in the state of Pennsylvania, and I'm an outpatient therapist here at Pennsylvania Counseling Services, and I'm the mommy of a 5-month-old double rainbow baby, Lucas.
Hi, I'm Amanda White. I'm a licensed clinical social worker for PA counseling and an outpatient therapist in the office here in Lebanon. I'm also a mom of a 3-year-old boy and expecting a second boy who will be coming early November.
Hi, I'm Heather Martin. I am the program director for Family Based at PCS in Lancaster. I have 5 boys. We're a blended family. So it is 17, 16, dear Lord, 12, 8, and 6. Wow. Yeah, a lot of them.
Yeah. Heather and I often joke, because I am the mom of 2 little boys, 5 and 7, and Heather and I often will commiserate over the amount of urine in and around our toilets.
That's for sure.
So that is an adventure. Both boys as well?
Yes.
Wow, look at us,
boys,
all
yeah.
boy moms. I didn't plan that. Maybe I should have some girl moms on the pod. So I think just to kick us off, what we know is that motherhood has a tendency to impact mental health in different ways. I've often really liked and related to the quote of how motherhood is all joy and no fun. And I find that really lands and resonates for me. But when y'all think about your own journey and experience, so like bringing little humans into this world and sort of like shepherding them through life, what have you discovered? How has motherhood played into your own mental health or those around you, clients? What have you noticed of the impact of motherhood in our own joy?
I think for me, it was a lot of anxiety after my first miscarriage. There was anxiety going into my second pregnancy. And then after that miscarriage, there was more anxiety. Mm-hmm. And then I was anxious until I was probably about 6 months pregnant or so because I didn't know what was going to happen at that point, just given my history. And then it was about 6 or 7 months where I felt like I could actually relax and like, oh, it'll be okay. Things will be okay. So it definitely amplified my anxiety for a long period of time.
Kelsey, thank you for bringing like the concept of motherhood and pregnancy loss into the conversation, because I fear that that's not, I don't know, there's still a lot of stigma, there's still a lot of shame. I think it's something that a lot of women experience and are impacted by, and we just don't talk about it enough. So thank you. Mm-hmm. And I think anxiety, even in the healthiest pregnancy, is still a natural part of it. And so following multiple losses, I can't imagine the level of anxiety that shows up within the space.
And I think my boys are 18 and 15, and I had 4 miscarriages. So I had 1 before my first son, and then 2 in between, and then 1 after. And like now they call them rainbow babies. Like you said, you have a double rainbow. When I had my kids, there was no word for that. Like you didn't talk about that kind of stuff. I mean, it was more common than it was 20, 30 years ago, but it still wasn't like, oh, I have a rainbow baby. And, you know, like you didn't really celebrate that this was special because of the loss that you've had before. Not that it's not special anyway, but, you know, that it's a special experience. And, you know, now it's like, oh, I have a rainbow baby and a double rainbow baby, but I never knew that. I never called them that. You know.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting because I feel like we're all talking about like mental health is like for motherhood, it's starting before the baby's born. Because I mean, I had a miscarriage as well, and I remember that same anxiety. And then even like the birth process being traumatic. Like I remember having an emergency C-section, and it was COVID, and you could have limited visitors. And meanwhile, my husband had torn his ACL about 3 weeks prior, so it was like the support in the hospital from him was, you know, very helpful, maybe verbally, but like to get up and get around and get things. You know, we were relying on great nurses, which thankfully I feel like nursing staffs at hospitals just in general and OB wards are wonderful. They're saints, but like all of that mental health starts even before baby comes out. Like the trauma, the anxiety of just the birthing process in general. I mean, afterwards, my husband's like, how would you want to have another after that? And I'm like, well, we have this little miracle baby who I wouldn't change for the world, but it's a process to get there, like on your mental health, and even just through the birthing process being traumatic. Lots of women go through that, and I don't know that they all talk about it actually. So
It's interesting because I had 2 miscarriages as well, and you don't realize that. Like, I was young, and you don't realize just like what women go through and how many people actually experience that until like it happens to you. And when it did happen to me, it was very difficult because my sister just had a baby, and it was like 2 days before Christmas. And then after the trauma of that, and then having to go, celebrate Christmas with a new baby, it was really hard during that time. But so yeah, I had a miscarriage, then I had Hayden, and then a miscarriage, and then I had Gavin. So it definitely brought a lot of anxiety. I was always like, oh, like just waiting. So yeah.
But I think that we don't, I mean, even still, there is, I think we've come a long way in discussing pregnancy loss. I see, like online, on social media, they always have, like Miscarriage Awareness Month. They also have, like, NICU Baby Month, World Preemie Day. So my birth trauma was more tied to my second born. My water broke at 30 weeks, so I was on bed rest and hospitalized for several weeks with, like, shots every other day and a lot of crying. But it was something that at that time I remember like looking for resources, because that's what, like, I self-soothe through facts and information. So if I can find information, if I can find resources, and I had a tremendous nursing staff, but one of the physicians, and it was like the head NICU physician, came in and was like, well, and I know it was his job, it was his responsibility, but I was high on whatever they inject into your thighs to stop you from having babies, to slow your labor. And he comes in and he's like, well, I'm just here to tell you all the things that could go wrong, just in case, like in an effort to have informed consent. And I'm by myself in a hospital bed. I can't move. I'm hyper independent. So not being able to move is like just killing me. I'm trying to work still. I'm trying to do supervision on the phone and like brought my laptop in and he comes in and he goes, well, you have this and that, and the baby could have developmental delays or mental retardation or ADHD or this or that, or they could die or this or that or blah, blah, blah. And I'm just sitting, like, my head is swimming. I can't think straight. And I'm just sitting there thinking, like, there's gotta be a better way to do this right here. But I think when it comes to supporting mothers, especially mothers navigating traumatic birth, especially mothers in the aftermath of a pregnancy loss, especially mothers in the aftermath of a healthy birth, we could do a lot better. And so what are some ways that we could probably, that y'all have, or ideas that y'all have about the way in which we can wrap around either the mother that's just lost a baby, the mother just went through a hellacious birth, or the mother that went through the ideal birth scenario, which still sucks, but like the ideal birth scenario. What are some ways in which as a culture we can just do better? Because as Americans, we're not great at it.
Yeah, I think coming from the therapy and like social work perspective, I mean, I didn't talk to a therapist or social worker in the ER as I was having a miscarriage. The nurses were kind as they could be, being very busy though, and the doctor's, bedside manner varies amongst professionals, but there was never a time a social worker or therapist approached you. And would that have been helpful in that moment, just to have someone sit and listen or validate, like, this is hard and, I don't know what you're going through, but I'm here for you, or even just giving resources. I mean, some of us here are therapists, so we know how to seek our own help, like, thank goodness, and I've been in and out of my own therapy multiple times and processed lots of things. But for an average person who doesn't know the world of therapy and hasn't been a therapist and is scared to ask for help, I mean, those resources just to be given out or to talk to someone would be really helpful. And I know that wasn't offered to me after birth either. I felt like when I was in the hospital and was staying long throughout COVID and was in there like 7 days from induction to going home, like, I was getting mixed messages, and I was asking to talk to someone else, like, when am I going home? And that's when, hormones are raging, and I probably was not the nicest person to some of the nurses and doctors saying, I want to go home, I don't want to be here. But sending in somebody that would be more from a therapeutic perspective or a social worker would have probably helped to hear my concerns, but that wasn't offered, and for a multitude of reasons, I'm sure COVID being one of them. But I think even in general, we don't do that as a society. We don't necessarily offer the help, outright, or even we give a paper, and who's going to necessarily feel confident or brave enough to call someone on that paper and ask for help? I mean, even myself, I don't always want to ask for help.
Yeah, for me it was like my husband wasn't, he was great, but like didn't really understand the trauma that I was going through. And that was very hard. Plus I had no friends or family that had experienced what I experienced. So it was hard. And I think it was an awkward conversation for people to bring up, to talk about. So, I just kind of went through the motions and read a lot of literature and read a lot of books, and that's kind of how and again, my faith is how I got through it. But in the moment, yeah, like I was like, I have to navigate this. I didn't go to therapy, but it was really hard and very scary then when, I got pregnant the second time, like I said. So, yeah.
I think for me, it's the basics. Like, our church started a meal train for new moms. And that, like, I can tell you every person who brought me food or made me a meal or did my laundry, like any of those basic things that, like, I had really bad pregnancies too. So I was already behind by the time, like, the baby actually came because I was so sick for 9 months before that. So to have somebody just come in and help me do my day-to-day, because I'm like you, I'm super independent. I'm not going to tell anybody I need help with those things.
Yeah.
But if they do them, like, I think my parents came over and cleaned the house before I came back from the hospital. Like, that was awesome. Just those little things that, like, you're probably not going to ask for, but if somebody does them, you're going to be so grateful.
Oh, yeah. No, it's funny. You remember the people that showed up.
Yeah.
And I can remember, especially when I was on bed rest and my husband was at home with my oldest, so many people took food to him. So many people were like wrapped around my family so that I could focus on, like, just keeping that baby in and cooking him a little bit longer. And that was such a gift. And those are, some were people that you would have never imagined.
Right.
Like, man, like, we met through a breastfeeding support group, and we were never super close, but you fed my family like 5 meals while I was in the hospital, and you were also pregnant, so wow, like, that's amazing. You remember those places, and it does bring you closer to your tribe, I think.
Yeah.
I think absolutely using your social supports has been really valuable, and just having people who were willing to listen, because they don't always get it. If you haven't had a similar experience, you can't always relate, and people really don't know what to say. And I think that can be problematic too, because there can be so much inadvertent invalidation. I remember, I think it was after my second miscarriage, I scheduled an appointment with the OB, and she was trying to be comforting and hopeful and inspire optimism and saying, like, yeah, like, I had 2 miscarriages too, and usually the third one is fine. And I was like, okay. But I also found the need to advocate for myself. And I asked, is there some testing that we could do? And I was hesitant to ask because I assumed insurance wouldn't cover it. It would be very invasive and it would be very expensive, all of which were wrong. It was a simple blood test, and they told me that my thyroid levels were twice what they should be for fertility, and the doctor started me on just a low dose of a thyroid medication, and I didn't have issues with my third pregnancy. But had I not asked, I would have continued to have miscarriages, because what I learned was the medical community standard for recurrent miscarriages is 3. And that's when they will offer testing as a standard, which I thought was very fascinating.
I remember that too, the 3, because I remember the one doctor was kind of a little flippant about it, like, oh, you've only had 2 miscarriages. And even when I had 3, they said, well, you had 3, but you had a live birth in between, so that doesn't count. So we're not going to do any testing to find out why you've had these 3 miscarriages. because you had one healthy baby, so it's not a big deal. And I was like, but I want another healthy baby.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's weird because it's like they see this stuff every day,
Right.
Yeah.
and they become it's just in their nature.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think they forget, like, we're a one person here, one human, like dealing with
Right.
this, and yeah, that can be tough.
No, that I had tremendous. I also had nobody come to me in the hospital after either of my births, except when my son was in the NICU. I got a NICU social worker that came and spoke with me, but that even was more focused on it, like social worky things, like case management style things. It was not therapeutic. It wasn't like, how are you doing? You don't look great. How are things? And I remember she came in and she's like, so how's your housing situation? Do you have access to food? How's your transportation? I was like, yeah, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I make a decent paycheck. Like, I'm fine. I'm not fine though. Like, but she didn't ask me about my mood.
Yeah.
She didn't ask me about my anxiety. She didn't ask me. My son was on the NICU, and when you're in the NICU, you have like little pods. So it's usually like 6 babies to a pod. And I remember one of the babies in our pod was just really medically fragile. And I don't know what his story was, but he was really sick. And then another one of the babies in our pod had was detoxing from opiates. I mean, you're not supposed to know that, but nurses talk, and I was there a lot, so I could tell it. And this little girl was just screaming like the whole time. So I'm there like trying to bond with my baby, driving home in the morning, like doing breakfast with my oldest, coming back to the hospital, like just zipping back and forth, and just listening to this little girl with these gut-wrenching screams as I'm trying to like soothe my little guy. And I remember sitting there and like, shouldn't someone be paying attention to the, like, I don't know, this feels like a liability, this feels risky. And I think even since then, at least the hospital that I delivered at where my son was in the NICU, they've since built little hospital rooms that you can actually stay in with your NICU baby as long as they're not like deeply medically fragile. My son was a feeder grower, so I was really lucky. He didn't need anything else but time and heat to get bigger and be able to regulate his own body temperature. But that's not the case. My sister-in-law had a baby at 23 weeks. He was in the NICU for 4.5 months. And she just drove back and forth 45 minutes to and from the hospital. And how different would her story have been if she could be present and have stayed there with him? So I think we're making advances, but we're not there yet.
Yeah. And I think what we're talking about is like all of this is so unpredictable. Like you get pregnant, you expect, like whatever pregnancy looks like in the 9 months of pregnancy and the various symptoms, which, all vary for all of us, but we can maybe mainly tolerate. But then birth comes and you don't know how that's going to go. And even the after stuff, you don't know how that's going to go. Will you be able to breastfeed or not? What will be comfortable to you? What will your support be like? Nobody prepares you for any of it. So you're kind of like thrown into it. And I feel like, we're all fairly intelligent people like sitting around this table, and still nothing could prepare me for some of the challenges you face. You're just kind of thrown into it, and it creates a lot of like humility. I mean, I think back of like some of the clients I've worked with before I was a mom, when they were, and them telling me like, I don't have time for this, or I don't know how to get a shower, I can't do self-care. And then I'm like, I get it now. Like, I do get it now. Yeah, things maybe I was suggesting or offering, you can't. Like, you don't have the time.
Nothing
and you don't have
prepares
the
you for it.
support. Like, so you're just thrown into this journey, which, again, is beautiful and you wouldn't trade for the world. But at the same time, there's all these challenges that no one prepares you for.
Yeah, I lived in La La Land, I'm pretty sure. Like, I was like, this is going to be the best. And it is. I don't want to sound like it's not. But, like, I was like...
But it's not all magic.
No, this is going to be wonderful. Like, this is going to be the best thing ever. And then I can remember after Hayden was born... they used to keep them like in the nursery and then bring them to you.
Yeah.
And I heard a baby being brought down the hallway, and I was like, dear God, please don't let it be him, please. And like, that is terrible. And
You're so tired.
I know. And then I told my girlfriend that was pregnant. And she was like, when you said that, I was a little like, oh. But then after I had my baby, I was like, okay, like I totally understand this. So yeah.
My grandmother used to say that she didn't like her kids till they were 6 months old. And I said, Grandma, that's horrible. And then I remember calling my mom when Christian was, I don't know, maybe a month old, and I had him sitting in a chair, and I'm like, I was fortunate to be a stay-at-home mom, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with him. Like, he doesn't do anything. You know, he just sits there, and unless I'm feeding him or something, like, I feel like I should be interacting with him, but there's nothing to do. And it's like, I get it now. Like, I get why she said that.
Yeah. I remember my husband and I agreed early on it was way harder than what we thought it was going to be with a newborn. Like, we knew it would be hard, but then actually living it, it was like, oh, this is really hard.
No, I had like a psychotic moment. I was so tired and I was so sleep deprived, and I was washing my hair, and like many women do, you got to let the conditioner set, right? So I had it sitting up on top of my head, and a strand fell down on my face, and I was like, there's an octopus in my shower. And like nothing could have convinced me otherwise. And like I didn't recall taking any like psychedelic prior to that moment, but I was that tired. And I think the same came through with my second. I had a terrifying moment where I got out of the car to get him, but I had forgotten to put the car in park. And so the car started moving with him in it, like down the embankment in front of our house, and I had to like jump in the car, and like luckily everything went okay. But those early days, those early weeks, months, years, they're heavy. And so what do you all imagine that as either a helping profession or just as a culture or society, what are some safeguards we might be able to put in place during those moments to make it 5 to 10% easier, other than paid parental leave? Because yes, we need paid parental leave, U.S. government. That would be fantastic.
I think something that was really helpful for me, actually, Kim, was you.
Wow.
Yeah. So you talked a lot about co-regulation, like the year before I had my baby. And so it was like super fresh on my mind. I was like, all right, co-regulation, like I need you to stay calm or get calm. I got to calm myself. I got to bring it. And so that was like super helpful. I was just, that was actually magical for me. I was able to really channel my inner peace very often, which allowed me to actually be more mindful, and co-regulation's like going well, generally speaking, because I practice it early on.
Yeah. I think for me, like, I don't know if you guys notice this, but like in the beginning, everyone's there. And then like after a couple months, you feel like you're on your own. And so that experience can be really hard because that's when things are like really starting to happen. You know, in the beginning, they just sleep basically. And so having like a continued support system, like don't forget about me, like 6 months later, like I still have this little baby kind of thing. To be able to just talk about what's going on with, you know, yourself and, you know, the issues that you're having. I think just maintaining like a long-term support versus just in the very beginning.
And I noticed that a lot with when I had my second one too, like maintaining that support when you have another one, because like it's like, oh, you had one already, you know what you're doing, you don't need me. You know, when I had my first one, everybody was in the hospital. We ordered pizza, like everything. The second one, it was like maybe a handful of people stopped. They're like, oh, you've done this before, you're good.
You've got this.
Yeah, and I'm like, yeah, but I have a 2-year-old at home and a newborn, so yeah, a little help would be nice. I think we need to continue that support.
Yeah, I think that support's key. And I remember like when I gave birth to my first, so that was COVID, we were in the hospital, they started the mask mandate, and then it was, you know, can you let people see the baby or not? We couldn't have visitors. It was just my husband, and he had to stay there the whole time. He couldn't leave and go back and forth. So, like, we had to be really creative about our supports. Like, I mean, I remember my parents got me, like, a Jimmy John's sub, because that was my dream after, or Jersey Mike's, maybe it might have been, after pregnancy. So, you know, we had that. And then, of course, like, they greeted us when we got home from a distance with a welcome sign and a meal. And all of that was incredibly helpful. But, like, that wasn't my dream or my vision of, like, people coming to the hospital, not maybe in huge crowds, but small doses of that coming into the hospital, and then having my mom be there to hold my baby at home, like the day we go home. But instead we waited I don't know, it was probably 2 or 3 months till family held him, like masked, obviously, because we didn't know what was going on and what to be fearful of or worried about. So we were waiting on, I don't know, answers, even though no one really had them. Even our pediatrician, I'm like, can I let my parents hold him or not? And he's like, well, masked, sanitized, cleaned if they don't have symptoms, But that was not the experience that I would have ever like predicted or wanted. And there were people that showed up in various ways and dropped off meals and did different things. But like having that person to sit down with you, hold the baby if you wanted a break from holding the baby, the silver lining I think my husband and I look back on is like we were able to just be so intimately close with the baby and parent together without interruptions or too much advice, which can sometimes be a bad thing. So, we were able to have that bonding experience, and it definitely made us closer in some ways. But I can think of many times it would have been so great to have a friend stop by, my mom stop by, like have people there and be physically close to you versus trying to support from a distance. So, there's a lot of things I wish I would have had, but just weren't the reality back then. So, yeah.
And I don't think in our society we have like the village mentality that maybe we had when moms did all stay at home. Like we don't help each other anymore. Even as mine are older, it's like there's other kids in my neighborhood and I think, why aren't we carpooling? Like my mom and my friends' moms, took turns taking us places. I thought we're all going to the same place and we all take our kids separately. Like, why are we doing this? But that's just kind of the way our society is now. It's like, oh, well, we're going to grab dinner after, so we'll just go ourselves, or, this or that. And we always have an excuse, but we never, I think if we made more of an effort to, like, know our neighbors and, know the other parents and kind of help each other, like, that would be so much more beneficial.
I agree. And I mean, you speak to this. I feel like those early baby days are hard for a whole host of different reasons. Like, your body's not okay. You're not sleeping, or maybe you are. I don't know. Some people are lucky. Not me. Never me. My 5-year-old still sleeps in our bed every night.
Mine did till he was 12, just
Oh
telling
my
you.
goodness. Oh my goodness. No.
There's hope after 12.
Oh, after 12. This too will pass. For me, I don't know that it got easier as they got older. It just got different as they got older. And I think I've always been fiercely independent. I've always done my own thing. And no one told me when I had a baby that my heart was going to now exist outside of my body. And that the shit that happens to them is going to happen to me. And I'm not going to be able to do anything about it because I like to feel in control of my environment. And for the most part, I can be enough of a force that my immediate world I can navigate with enough brute strength to get through the day. But then when I had to send these little beings off to daycare and have the imperfect daycare experience, or last year with my oldest, we navigated some pretty severe bullying at his school, and just feeling helpless and not having that opportunity to I can't muscle this. And Lord help me, I tried. I met with everyone. I wrote letters. I went straight Karen. And I still, my only recourse was to pull my son from school. And I don't know that anyone warned me of that. I don't know that I was prepared for that. That this idea that I am inherently introducing vulnerability into my life, which was a thing I tried pretty hard to avoid.
It's so true. My oldest son has ADHD, and he struggles in school. 4 of the kids play football. Hayden's an amazing athlete, but his ADHD, he struggles with the plays, and so his confidence goes down. And then, it breaks my heart. I literally, my heart aches for him, and that's how it is. Anytime your kid is going through, when my kids are happy, I feel like I'm happy. When my kids are sad, I'm sad. And it's oh my gosh, is this going to be my entire life? Even when they're 40 or 50, because it is so hard. You never realize just how much you can love somebody. And seeing them go through trials and tribulations, you're in it too, and you feel the exact. I just had that conversation with Hayden. When you're in pain, I'm in pain, and it's really hard. It's emotionally exhausting.
And it's a different kind of love than you could ever experience prior.
Oh, yeah.
Like I've always been a dog mom. You know, I love my puppies, and it's different. I love my husband, but when he's in pain, I'm like, suck it up, Buttercup. You got this. But like when it's your kids,
Yeah.
it's just such a different. And I remember having a client once tell me, I love my child more than anything in the world, and if I could go back in time and have a do-over in which I would never know that I had a do-over, right? Like I couldn't lose my child, but if I could go back and have never been a parent in the first place, I would have done it. And I remember when, you know, I think I'm a fairly good psychologist, so non-judgmental stance, hold that lightly. But I remember in my head thinking like, that's pretty fucked up. Like, really? You would undo? And I don't think I fall into that camp. I would never undo. Probably if my husband had stopped us, we would have more. And I do get it. I see how there is a temptation to if you could protect yourself in that way, I could see where it would be seductive.
Yeah. And I think it's so different for mothers versus fathers, too, that emotional load and connection you're talking about. I mean, I think my husband's a phenomenal dad, but yeah, do I feel those emotions probably a bit heavier as a female and as a mother who like held this child and birthed this child? Yes. And even the mental load of thinking of then that child and what they're going through throughout the day, or are they okay, or what do we need for the house for to get ready for whatever we're doing next, you know, like a lot of that falls on moms too, which is challenging and we don't necessarily prepare for when we're pregnant either.
Right.
And I mean, you joke about your kids being just like you, but my 18-year-old thinks the way I think. And, you know, I've had anxiety, I've had depression, I've had all these issues, and I know what's going on in his head. And that just like breaks my heart because I'm like, I know he's thinking the same ways I think, and I don't want anybody else to feel the way I feel sometimes. And it's almost easier with my youngest because his mind is just nothing like mine. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on in that head. And like, I help him, and you know, when he has anxiety issues, but the oldest one just like, it hits me harder because it's me. And it's just like, I don't want him to feel these things. And I understand him so well. And that helps in some ways. But then in some ways, I'm like, well, I didn't fix that in myself. I don't know how to help you do that either. So it's, nobody prepares you for that.
No. I think that's where that vulnerability, like that you were talking about, Kim, like that you don't want to be vulnerable about all the feelings you're having, but it's so helpful because like I know myself, I start thinking like, no one else's child is doing this, or no one else is having these thoughts, or no one else is feeling the way I'm feeling. And then I feel like, you know, I had a couple mom friends prior to my son, my 3-year-old being born, but then after he was born, we kind of had joined a new church and developed a group at that church. We have it's like a young parenting group that now we've been a part of. Gosh, it has to be close to 3 years because it was close to after he was born once we started getting back to church. So it's men and women. We meet together. We do an online thing like after kids are in bed one night a week because Zoom works well for the kids that are in bed. Some kids are up on TV or tablets, you know. But aside from that, we also have like the women's chat, which the men are happy to stay out of because there's lots of text messages in the women's chat throughout the day. But it's even just so helpful that like the other day a mom was saying, okay, my kid's having this experience in kindergarten and, you know, I'm not there yet, but I'm going to be there eventually. Give me a couple years. And then I'm saying, you know, my kid's just starting preschool and it feels like, oh, that should be no big deal. He's only going to preschool 2 mornings a week. It's very close to our house, but he's always been watched by family before. So now it's like, I don't know, I'm still like, I'm sending my child to these people. I don't know them. I've just met them a couple of times through a tour and orientation. And I'm like, you know, I'm probably crazy. That's not as much as going to kindergarten for the first time. And they're all like, no, like those feelings are valid. You know, I mean, as women, when we share that and then you feel that sense of support that maybe you don't always get from your husband, your significant other, your male counterpart at home, you know, it's just a different type of support for them to say, like, no, I felt that way too when I was a stay-at-home mom and had someone else watch my child, or, you know, just that separation, like you're launching your kid to another stage and transition. It's still something new. Like he's going to preschool. There's more kids around him. He told me the first day, you know, I cried today. And I'm like, you didn't tell me you cried. And he's, I'm like, a lot or a little? A little. what'd you cry about? I cried about you. I'm like, you wouldn't have been with me anyway, buddy. Mommy was at work. You would have been with Grandma, Papa. But, like, it's those moments that, like, that was when you text the women and you go, like, this happened. And then you feel that support and honesty, and you're like, okay, this isn't just me. You know, I'm not the only one holding on to these really heavy emotions that are just too much to carry alone.
Yeah.
They really are. So, like, I'm so grateful for that support. I think, you know, like, that informal support and having those friends that have kids at different ages is so helpful to kind of shed light on things.
Yeah.
Stages of life are that they go through. It's quite interesting. I have a diverse group, and so like what the 17-year-old's dealing with versus what the 6-year-old's dealing with is like totally different. So we're kind of all over the place, but I as a mom take life transitions very hard. So like things like preschool and first day of high school or first day of middle school and things like that. Like it's very hard for me.
I didn't think I would cry, and I did.
Did
and
you?
he didn't cry. He walked in very willingly, and I thought that would be hard. And I'm like, if he cries, I'll cry. And a coworker of mine and friend was like, you know, do you think he'll cry if he just walks in? I'm like, no, I'll feel proud and happy that he just walks in and he can separate from me. Nope.
I think that's the other thing about it has become impossible to predict how things will impact me. Because like on one hand, like I don't know that I take the transitions as hard. It's cool for me, like to get to know them in this new stage. Like I feel like, especially like my 7-year-old right now, like we have the coolest conversations, and he's so creative and he's so interesting, and like getting to know him. I thought I would grieve the loss of like the baby him more than I don't love babies. Babies aren't totally my thing. Like I like babies a lot more now. Than
with
like
you.
10 years
Yeah.
ago.
Yep.
10 years ago, someone's like, "Do you want to hold my baby?" No.
Yeah.
No. Now, like, yeah, I would love to hold your baby. Yes. So I have changed some. But getting to discover him and getting to like know him is just such, and my youngest as well, but he's still kind of a mama's boy, and it's just a little bit different with him. So it's so cool to get to see them enter these new phases and stages and get to know them as they are and as their personalities emerge. And there are days where it's like, oh shit, that's me. That's part of me. Oh no, I don't love that. Or you see like a part of you that you carry really heavy, like my own anxiety. And so when I see his anxiety show up, it's like, man, I wish I had the solution for this. But 38 years, still haven't figured it out. So I don't... All right, buddy, like, what do we do here? And, like, red wine and bad reality TV can't be your answer. So, let's play outside, I guess, and, like, get enough water, try to sleep tonight. I don't know. So, it's tough.
Yeah, the biggest transition was when they turned from like 12, 13 to like where they didn't want anything to do with you. So like Hayden was very like a mom's baby, and then I can remember the moments that he was like transitioning over, and I don't like this. You know what I mean? Like he was independent, and he was like in his room all the time and talking about girls and things like that. And that was probably the hardest transition.
I imagine.
Yeah.
Well, and it has been hard. So when my son, my oldest, turned maybe like 6.5, 7, and I read, so of course self-soothe through facts. So I started reading about like things you should know as a mother of boys. And one of the things they talk about is right around that age, they become very daddy centric. And so he went from like a mama's boy to a daddy's boy. And my husband has long hair, and so he's growing his hair out now. And he, you know, football and and the good news is I love football and basketball and all the things as well, so I can like join a little bit in those spaces, but like I don't like WWE wrestling on the regular. And so that's very much like daddy's space. And so you start to feel, as much as I love getting to know him and meet him, it is hard when they shift from a little less you and a little bit more others. And I imagine when we hit that 12, 13, 14, that shift will become even more apparent.
Yeah.
I'm not looking forward to it.
Yeah, Gavin's 12, and he's on the cusp. And I'm like still like holding on to him, like, don't get older. But yeah.
No, I really enjoy it though. Like my 18-year-old, I love that we can go out and have dinner together and the conversations that we can have. Because I'm kind of like you. Like I'm not a kid person, which is funny to say, but like I had no interest in having a lot of little kids. Like I wanted them to be this older group that, like I wanted them to have each other. And I looked so forward to these teen years. Like I remember the church asking me one time when they were little if I wanted to be the nursery aide. And I was like, hell no. Like, I don't like my own sometimes. I don't want to be with anybody else's. But
This
I
is
love
meant
this.
to be my hour away from
Right.
them.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But I love this, I just love seeing that age. But it is still hard. Like I said, like my youngest is my baby. Like he still would sneak down in the middle of the night till like he was like 12 or so, and now we had the girlfriend and he's in his room all the time, and he doesn't care what mom's doing. And I was all excited because we went homecoming shopping and he actually wanted me to stay with him, and I was like, really? Like I was just going to go do my own thing. And he's like, well, aren't you going to come with us? And I'm like, okay, like I can do that. Like that's cool.
I love that you're describing all of that, because I feel like the mother-son dynamic, like, right, like I didn't necessarily always picture myself only being a boy mom, but I think that's what God has planned for us, and I'm good with it. But I've thought, you're not going to take a daughter dress shopping,
Right?
But that's cool, like to form that other different kind of connection. And my husband's very much into sports. I'm not going to teach you how to play certain sports, maybe at this age, but not like 5-10 years from now.
I tried to teach my youngest how to hit a baseball, and first pitch, hit him right in the face.
That would be me too.
Well, not for me
either.
He always wants me when we used to do soccer shots. He's like, I want mom on the field. And I'm like, yes, I'm not the athlete, but you want me there. But I've often wondered, like, how will that change as he gets older, and like, what kind of connection can we develop? Yeah, when he's in high school, and I'm the mother of like a middle school and a high school boy. So you think already like into the future. I don't know. I think a lot into the future. I think more as a mom than I would have when I wasn't, actually. Like I would think about my own personal goals and career and different things I wanted. But I think when you're a mom, you start thinking a lot about future and just imagining different things, and especially seeing other kids be older. Like someone in our church group said the other day, like, oh, they'll be down in the basement together when they're in high school. Like they'd be in that same room. And I'm like, I can't even imagine that, but yeah, I guess so. If we're still here and we don't, move anywhere else or do anything else. But I think you start thinking of all those future moments and what they'll look like. So it's cool to hear. It's interesting that we're all boy moms around the table too. So for that experience,
we all sat
yeah.
I didn't think about, what the future might hold. Right now, I'm just in the stage where, like, he wants to be held all the time by mom. And I hold him all the time, and it works very well. And he's crying, and I come home, and I just hum or sing or do whatever, and he smiles, and we're good. I didn't think about, when he's in his room, and
Homecoming and
all those things.
Lord help those girls. I mean, like, I don't.
Oh, Hayden's getting married, and he's turning 16. He's getting, he's planning out his wedding. I'm like,
Oh my.
can we
my
just like get
15-year-old.
through high school?
Please, first.
Yeah.
One of the questions that we had submitted that I thought was a funny one, and so I'll move into that space in this moment. What was the worst advice you received, either early on or, I know some of you are in later stages of motherhood, the worst advice that was given to you about being a parent?
For me, it was breastfeeding. My sister was really into it. She had 3 kids, and it was her thing. It was her connection. Both of my boys were 10 pounds when they were born. They ate pretty much all day. And so I did not sleep. And I felt very guilty because I was not enjoying the experience. Like, I felt like a cow, kind of. And I'm serious. Like, it was all day from the time, just all day. And I kind of felt like a failure as a mom a little bit. After, I didn't mention this in the beginning, but after Hayden was born, 2 weeks later, I had a stroke from a blood clot that went up through the C-section. And so when I had Gavin, I was considered high risk, and so I was on all kind of like medications, and I couldn't breastfeed him, so I felt a little bit of a relief. But my life in the beginning with trying to feed Hayden and feeling the pressure of that was really, really hard. When I stopped and he went on formula, the first time he slept for like 6 hours, and it totally like changed our life because I thought Scott and I were going to kill each other. But that was like a huge pressure that I felt. Like I needed to do certain things I needed to do to be a good mom, but they were expectations of other people, and it wasn't what worked for our family. And I always would feel guilty about that.
I think directly related to that, the worst advice I was given was actually from a CNRP at my gynecologist's office. I went for a lactation appointment. At the hospital, breastfeeding was really good. I needed to increase my production, but the process was going really good. And so the CNRP looked at me and said, you need to give him formula in addition to every breastfeed. And I felt so completely defeated when I left. And then the problem came where he just wanted the bottle because I came out faster. And so that was really challenging. And over time, my milk didn't increase. And so I wasn't able to breastfeed, which was my plan. And he had a good latch, like things are going well, but I just couldn't maintain it because I felt so defeated and depressed once I left that appointment. And then when I went to his pediatrician, she was also a lactation consultant, and she was like, that would not have been my first recommendation because I also need to think about your mental health. And I was like, yes, let's take a holistic approach, please, and thank you. But initially when I received that advice, I was sleep deprived. I was trying to do everything right. You know, I was trying to be like the best mom I could be. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I'm failing my kid. I have to give I'm starving my kid. And I think it probably would have been fine if I hadn't listened to that advice initially.
Yeah. I think people have to understand, for moms out there particularly, that other people's experiences may not match yours, and that's okay. Like everyone does things differently, and you really are in survival mode, like when you have a baby, and it doesn't really matter what other people do, and those expectations shouldn't be put on you. You just really have to do what works for you and your family.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt like it was so much less stress once I moved to formula because then I wasn't upset seeing him frustrated, trying to breastfeed when I wasn't producing enough. It did take a weight off. But it was hard too, right? Because you're also struggling with the guilt and you're exhausted. And so your emotions are exacerbated naturally already in conjunction with all the hormonal changes. I had a C-section. I'm recovering from that. You know, there was a lot going on, especially when they're just brand new.
Yeah.
I think the worst advice I got was from a coworker, right? A former coworker, right? When I was about to go out. And they had mentioned, don't be afraid to ask for help. And I don't know that that's terrible advice. But then I remember looking who the fuck am I supposed to ask for? Like, who are these mythical beings that are out there waiting for me to ask? Like, who do I ask? Like, my mom had already been showing up pretty regularly. My mother-in-law lived really far away, but whenever she would fly in, she would do her best to be supportive. I had developed other close mom friends through a lactation group that I went to. So I live right by the Hershey Med Center, and they had this tremendous program for women to come multiple times a week, and you would breastfeed with your peers. It was just a bunch of women sitting on the floor feeding their babies, and they had one of those really good scales that you could weigh your transfer and all kinds of different things. So that was so helpful. I would not have been able to breastfeed my first without it. But they're drowning too. Like, do I ask these women for help? So who do you? And so it was just kind of this don't be afraid to ask for help. But who am I supposed to ask? And then I remember even at work, every once in a while being like, hey, can you take this? I've got this other thing, and be like, no, I'm drowning. I can't help you. And it's all right. Well, then where are these help unicorns that are supposed to come out of the woodwork? And Then I remember feeling like guilty that I'm not asking for help, but then also, and like I asked my partner, and like I got into therapy at a certain point, especially after my second, just a lot of anxiety emerged following our birth experience. And so I got help, but like, I don't know, and there's a lot of, I've heard that advice from moms a lot, like, don't be afraid to reach out, but who?
Yeah.
Who am I asking for help?
Yeah.
The DoorDash guy, he's helpful, but outside of that, like, I don't know.
Yeah. I think there's also like the media or like global, like soak it all in, like enjoy every newborn snuggle. Like some of you guys just said, you know, not liking like the baby stage. And I remember being like, no, like I don't know, looking back, now I'm about to have a newborn, but like the newborn stage wasn't my favorite. So right. Like saying that or imposing like you should be enjoying every moment imposes that guilt again when you're like, no, I'm kind of bored of this moment, or I don't know how to calm this crying, fussy baby who's just crying because it's the evening hour before bed and it's, you know, it's a hard time. So, like, even just imposing that, like, soak it all in, you can't get these days back, like, that, like, very global advice can be very guilt-imposing because you're like, well, no, I don't want this day. I want us to move forward. I want to get to the sleeping stage, or I want to get to, like, yes, when they're able to go longer stretches without food and we can do more things, you know, like, you know, you want to get to some of those next stages. So saying, don't wish it away or enjoy this one is sometimes just in guilt imposing in itself because you're like, no, I want to get to that next stage. And that's okay, too. Like, it's okay to get through those moments and still love it and have all the pictures and all the cuddles and look back and know that that was a huge part of your journey. But it's okay to say, like, no, I didn't really love that stage. I'm okay that we're past that now. You know, that's okay to say and have that acceptance, you know, without feeling guilty.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, and this is probably going to be counter to you, Kim, but for me, like, the worst advice was when somebody would say, read this book or read that book. Like, I felt personally like it was just better not knowing what I was getting myself into because there's so many opinions. You know, it's like the breastfeeding, like, you know, breastfeed or don't breastfeed, or, you know, co-sleep or don't co-sleep or whatever. And so I would always, when my friends would say, well, what book should I read? I'd say none of them. Like, just do what seems right to you.
Yeah.
Like, just do what's best for you and that baby, because everybody's experience is different, and you know, you can find a book that says anything you want it to say at this point. So yeah, for me, that was my biggest thing. Like, I started with that, what to expect when you're expecting, and I think I got, I don't know, 30 pages into it, and I'm like, all right, I'm done with this. I don't want to know what's coming. Like,
I was completely opposite. Today, the baby is a whatever snail, and you know, like they like
potato.
reference, like
I was so good at that first pregnancy, and then I feel like second pregnancy is a whole new ballgame where I'm like, what week are we at today? Let me check the app. Yes. Like, where are we?
And I remember especially after my youngest was born, him being a preemie and just very different experiences, even, and today they're very different children. I think it has nothing to do with his prematurity. They're just different kids, temperamentally and otherwise. But like, I relied on that app as a form of self-soothing to say, like, because it would adjust for developmental age. And so it would say, like, he shouldn't be there yet. And so I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But I agree with you that, like, too much education or reading too many different things or going down, like, that clicky rabbit hole on the internet. I mean, there were so many times where, like, my oldest had, while I was pregnant with my second, had hand, foot, and mouth. And I remember thinking, like, well, how will that impact him? How will that impact me? What do we do next? Da, 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 da. And, like, there is a range of answers on the internet. And so I finally went to the doctor and said, what do I do? My son has hand, foot, and mouth. Can that impact my second born? And they're like, no, you're good. You're fine. But the internet had told me everything from, like, you were about to have an avatar baby to everything would be golden and just about everything in between. I'm like, what?
Yeah, and if you're sleep deprived, Googling and researching all of those things, you know,
At
you're
3
buying
a.m.
into it, and you're not thinking rationally, like, as you would as a psychologist, knowing some of this is true, some of this is not true. There's not evidence for all of this.
I feel like I'm pretty good at, like, determining whether or not a source is valid, except in early stage motherhood. I was like, this is definitely valid. And then, like, it was not
This
valid.
one story is definitely going to happen to my kid,
Yes,
too. Yeah.
yes. So what do we think about the way in which, or have you all noticed any ways in which societal expectations or cultural norms has impacted your experience of motherhood? Or are there any ways in which, even though I know several of you are in the helping professions as well, are there any ways that you've noticed that expectations have impacted the mental health or well-being of the clients you serve?
I think just the expectation of being able to do it all is so hard for anyone to live up to because there's so much balance. Whether you're a stay-at-home mom or you're working, you need to still take care of the kiddo, and the house should be clean, and you should be contributing to the household in some way, shape, or form.
And you should also be back to your pre-baby weight.
Oh yeah, you should be looking real good too. It's been 4 months, girl. What's happened? You have all this time. You're off work. It's really hard, and then to also take care of yourself physically, and then to try to tend to any other relationships. There's so many juggling acts that you're doing, and it's really hard.
Yeah, so I'm a big proponent of going to therapy when you need it. My kids go to therapy when they need it. They tell me, hey, I need to talk to somebody. But I remember talking to my therapist one day, and it was like, I don't understand why I'm so tired and I'm so stressed and my husband isn't. Like, we work together. We essentially have the same job. We're together all day long. I said, everything's the same. Why can he handle it and I can't? And she said, but is it? She's like, is it really the same? She said, is he worrying about dentist appointments and doctor appointments and the schedule and who needs to be where when? And he's not. Like, I mean, he's a great dad, don't get me wrong, but he doesn't worry about those things. He just assumes that they show up on the calendar and,
The shared calendar.
Yes, on the shared calendar, that they just suddenly appear and, that somebody else will most likely take care of them unless I tell him he needs to do it, and it's like, oh, well, yeah, I guess you're right. Like, I have so many other things going on in my head, and, there's even so many things that the boys and I do together that, like, he doesn't even know about because he's already left, but I'm the one getting him off to school, and it's just, it was really eye-opening to me. It's like, oh, yeah, like, I guess I do have a little more than he does.
I work with a lot of women, or have historically worked with a lot of women in recovery from like substance use disorders and different things. And I think there's a lot of stigma surrounding motherhood and your own mental health, motherhood and substance use disorders, motherhood, even working. And I remember with my oldest, I ended up coming back to work at 10 days postpartum because I thought I'd be fine. I just thought it would be okay. And then having to go back out again, because pretty quickly I realized, like, my work product was suffering, my home life was suffering, like, what am I doing here? And so fortunately in that moment had the insight to go back out again. But I work with a lot of women in recovery from substances, and then they say, like, I don't want to work my recovery as a mother because then people will judge me for for going to NA or AA meetings and like bringing a baby with me or going to IOP or therapy or whatever it is. And so in an effort to avoid that judgment, they avoid also accessing the resources and support they need for them to be okay. And I see that childbirth phase, at least historically throughout my career, being a time in which sorry, my stomach is growling really loud today. I didn't have time to eat before I got my kids on the bus today. And so motherhood. I remember seeing that as being a point in which a mother or a father, I had a lot of dads that I've worked with that have relapsed when their children were born. And I think part of it is your whole recovery system gets shaken up. And then how do you support them in accessing the resources they need, and two middle fingers up to whatever stigma comes down the line, because this is what they need to be the best version of themselves for their kid.
And we tell those individuals, like, nothing can come above your recovery. Like, that's the priority. But then you give birth, or even fathers that are very involved, and you hear from society, your child has to come first. So that's a very contradictory message, because I can think of so many substance use clients I've worked with where I'm like, recovery needs to be number one, right? What happens if we put something above our recovery? You lose your recovery. You could relapse. You could struggle. But society and culture would say something different about children and parenting, that has to come first. And that's even damaging if you're not in recovery or struggling with substance use or mental health, thinking, I can't take care of myself, baby comes first no matter what. When, no, sometimes, baby could cry when you get a shower quick if you really need that. So I think, that's an expectation, just that comes above everything else. When, no, your child's basic needs are met and you need 5 minutes for a shower, that's okay. It's okay to take care of yourself in some of those moments. But it's easier to say those things than to do those things yourself as a mother, as a parent.
Yeah, I used to be very, I don't know what the word is, but cautious, or compare myself to other parents and what they were doing. And in my older age, I just don't give a shit anymore. That's terrible. But I'm this is my life, this is my family, this is how I parent, this is what works for us. And once I started taking on that kind of thought process, it's been a lot better. Because when we start comparing our families, our life, our kids to other people and their experiences and what's happening in their lives, I think that can depress a parent. It would get me down. And I just don't allow myself to go there anymore.
I think those comparisons often also lead to so much judgment.
Yeah.
Kim, when you started talking about individuals with substance use disorder, a lot of times we're working with individuals who don't have a lot of resources. So it's so hard to do everything you need to do. And then I'm just thinking for myself, how in the world would I have gone to an AA meeting regularly?
Yeah.
How would I do that?
Yeah.
I have no idea how I would do that. And I have a lot of resources. I would feel guilty trying to do that. And I was fortunate enough I could take 3 months off of work before coming back to work, but not all moms do that. My husband works for a very large company. He had 6 weeks off. That's so hard to find. So many people do not have that experience. And now there's so many individuals who are not as privileged as what I am. I've been so blessed. And that's such a struggle to try and manage everything. And you have to work. And then, well, how do I find childcare? It's really hard.
Particularly in America. You read about all these other countries that have off for a year. After they have a baby. And I'm why can't that be here? So that's frustrating.
No, I think the judgment and comparison, I like that particular, and I've always liked the quote, comparison is the thief of joy. I also have experienced, especially as my kids get older, there are times where I've noticed in either friend groups or mom groups or, different social circles, that children are viewed more as a product of the parent. And so if your kiddo has anxiety, or if your kiddo is struggling with math, or what are you not doing as a parent?
Absolutely.
And I so frequently see, I'm in mommy groups, and it's always interesting when someone's I have this problem, and it's do this, try that, have this, do that. Are you feeding your child enough? No, but he won't eat it.
Yeah.
I place it in front of him, but a couple weeks, and my youngest is a horrible eater. He doesn't stop moving. So you have to stop moving to eat. And we were away a couple last week. I was at a conference and I was lucky enough to be able to take him with me. And I'm trying to get him to eat before I have to go back to my mom went with. So I had to go back to whatever I had to do for work. And I'm just holding French fries in front of his face. Please just eat the salty, the salty fried carb, anything, any nutrients, because you're going to get cranky. And 20 seconds from now, you're going to be hungry. And I remember he picked up the French fries and just shoved him in my face. And he's like, "How do you like it?" And I realized I don't like it. I don't, and I love French fries, but I don't prefer that particular activity. But so often it's and I do believe that children are, in many ways, a result of their context. But context is huge. Context is not just their nuclear family or family of origin. It's their family. It's their extended family. It's their community. It's the year that they were born. Being born in the middle of COVID. My son was born 2 years earlier. And just very different experiences simply from that. And we put so much pressure on the parents, and I think oftentimes on mothers, but I think there's a lot of pressure on dads too, especially now versus even 25 years ago. There's so much pressure on the parent, and we don't, and a lot of it is like wrapped in this, like, what are you doing wrong that's leading to your child being this imperfect product, essentially. And that gets in the way. I think it gets in the way of connection. I think it gets in the way of regulation. I think it impedes our ability to be our best parent because we're so hyper focused on how we're going to be perceived and as our children as these extensions of us.
Yeah, and then you're second guessing every move you're making, and I mean, comparing with others, and social media makes it like all that much worse to see, you know, like, oh, what are those parents doing with their children? Or even just being around another kid. My kid's a terrible eater too, and I'm like, that kid's eating his vegetables. What did I do wrong for that not to happen for my child? He'll
nephew
try everything.
Eats like shark and
salmon
crab legs,
veggies,
and I'm like, what? French fries.
Where did we go wrong? Yeah, but would never think I'd be begging my child to eat like pizza, grilled cheese, or French fries or chicken nuggets, but here I am. But it's so easy to think that's a direct reflection of you. We just had a similar talk in our women's chat of friends of like getting a message from a teacher and then thinking, like, what did I do wrong for those behaviors to happen? And they weren't severe behaviors. It was like, you know, talking a little too much in class. But as a parent, you look at it like, how did I not prepare them? Or what did I do with this transition making those behaviors occur? When at the end of the day, I mean, kids are also just going to do what kids are going to do. They're these independent beings we sent out in the world, and we can try our hardest. But I know my son has a mind of his own. He is stubborn and he thinks for himself and he does things at times that I have no idea why he's doing that particular thing or why that happened or why he got upset over that particular thing. And I know logically it's not a reflection of my parenting, but in an emotional day or a rough day or when that tantrum's happening, I'm sure all of us can sit here and think, yep, this is my fault. What did I do wrong, you know? I didn't put him to bed early enough, or I didn't feed him the right foods, or whatever it might be. It's hard. That comparison is hard, definitely.
When I think that I lead to the worst version of myself as a parent. Like, I don't know that I'm ever a worse version of myself as a parent than like when I'm on an airplane. And I remember once my husband's family lives out on the West Coast. And so we finally, I think my son was 18 months, my youngest, and we're like, we're going to take them out. We're going to see his aunt and uncle. We haven't seen them in a while. And so we fly out there. And my youngest screamed the whole way from Seattle to Philadelphia for 5.5 hours. And I remember just the looks I was getting, like just scowling at it. It's like, I'm not having fun either.
Yeah.
Like, this
what do you want me to do?
What do you, like, do you want me to injure it? Like, I can choke him out maybe? Like, what do you want me to do? Yeah. And I remember, like, one woman in particular just being like, oh, God, oh, and it's like, what is wrong with you? Like, maybe you're not helping. Like, he at least has an excuse. What is yours? But I also think so often, I think that's going to lead me into our last call, is that we need to quit it. We need to lay off the judgment of parents, and I'm going to say it about mothers, but I mean it about anybody who's doing the difficult work of raising and shepherding tiny humans from, like, zygotes on up. It's not easy. It's a lot of work. It's really hard. And I remember getting judgment in pregnancy with like, oh, you're still drinking coffee, to, Sour Patch Kids, is that all you eat? And it's like, yeah, because otherwise I throw up. So yeah, all I eat is Sour Patch Kids right now. To the breast versus bottle conversation, the baby wearing versus stroller debate, the stay-at-home mom versus daycare dynamic, and everything in between. We place so much pressure and we throw all of this judgment. And so I think in my last call for today is that we need to lay off and recognize that, like, children are not products of their parents. Children are not, I love the analogy of like gardening versus we are gardeners as parents rather than architects as parents. We are not building our child brick by brick. We are creating a context and an environment where we try to protect them from predators, and we try to stop them from, we try to create the best soil for them to grow in and make sure they have all the nutrients and resources that they need. But ultimately, we're not making them into something. We're creating an environment in which they can discover who they are and what's congruent and consistent for them. And I think when we throw that judgment, that forces the architect mentality that I think belies connection, co-regulation. It's not helpful.
No, I think we have to give each other all grace. Like, everyone is just doing the absolute best they can, like, in the day, in the moment. And I don't know, like, when you talk about that architect mentality, like, if our kids see that, I mean, that's almost more harmful sometimes than our kids seeing the parent that messes up or that maybe appears a little bit stressed and then later has to apologize for appearing rushed and stressed and rushing you out the door. And, you know, I think it's far better that our kids see those vulnerable moments of, you know, I'm not handling my emotions the best, or I didn't say the correct thing here, and then we can repair that, because that's going to happen to them one day. It already is, really. They're already having difficulties managing their feelings when they're having that toddler temper tantrum. So if we can model that happens to all of us, it normalizes it. It doesn't shame our children. So it's about not shaming ourselves, so then we're also not going to shame our children. I mean, I think that's part of it too, to teach them that we're just human and we're all doing the best we can with no directions or instruction manual on what you should be doing as a parent. It's not there.
Anything left unsaid?
I think the only other thing I can think of is just remembering, like, we don't know what's happening in that other person's life. It's so easy to look at someone and say, oh my gosh, they're doing this or they're not doing that, but you have no idea what led to that particular behavior. And I think, to your point, Amanda, right, when you're talking about not shaming our children, could you imagine the society we could grow if we could create this culture where we're not shaming ourselves, each other, and children?
I think that shaming yourself, I think, is so important. Like, I think I see now where they say on the internet or something, like, you know, think if you said the things to your children that you say to yourself, like, how would you feel? Or if somebody else said those things to your children that you say to yourself. It's like, yeah, I would never want my kids to talk about themselves the way I talk about myself. No. I mean, it's just crazy.
Or you see your children talk to themselves the way you talk to yourself. And it's like, shit. Like, I've seen my son will sometimes, stupid Silas, stupid, I'm so stupid. And, like, that is the first place I go, like, what, I'm such an idiot. Like, and then it's like, man, like, did he hear me? Did he see, like, what micro messages am I sending to him that he's taken that on, where I've carried that for a while. So I think that self-compassion piece is huge. And I think demonstrating, like, a non-judgmental stance towards others is kind of one of our first way. Because the folks that I've known that have been the most judgmental often tend to be extremely hard on themselves. And so if you can first show yourself that compassion and grace and space, and then expand that out to the circle around you, I think, imagine what we could create in that environment. I want to thank y'all for joining me around this beautiful table, as we discussed earlier, and unpacking some of the biggest challenges that we have associated with motherhood. We have a couple upcoming pods, so I was challenged to host a fatherhood pod, so that's coming down the line. We also have a series on maintaining recovery and mental health during the holidays, so I'm very much looking forward to that conversation. I think our next pod is all about pets and how do they impact our mental health. And I think after that, we're getting into horror because we're in spooky season. So thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions for the pod on the upcoming pods, please don't hesitate to reach out at Kim at howtobehappyhour.com. And we'd be happy to bring your question onto the pod. Thank you.